Hi, my name's Bex, and I'm here to talk about loss and grief that I've experienced during joyful life transitions.
Welcome to The Silent Why, a podcast on a mission to uncover 101 different types of loss through the voices of those who have lived them. I'm Claire.
And I'm Chris, and this is Loss 60 of 101, and the very first Loss episode of 2025. Today we're talking to Bex Eyles, a professional counsellor from Berkshire in England, about the grief that can surprise us as it quietly weaves its way into some of life's more joyful transitions.
Yes, because even when good things happen, starting a new job, getting married, welcoming a baby, grief can still find a way in to remind us of what we've lost or left behind.
And just because grief shows up in these moments, it doesn't mean that joy and gratitude aren't there too. Bex, like so many others, has felt immense happiness and gratitude in these moments, but she's also honest about the unexpected emotions that also came up at the same time.
It's something many of us don't always acknowledge, but we all experience it in different ways. Like the single friend who hears of a friend's engagement, the couple struggling with infertility as they celebrate a friend's pregnancy, the parent watching their child get married and move out. Happiness and loss often exist side by side, especially when other people's lives intersect with our own.
And sometimes we might find both sides of these emotions exist within us. We've heard from people who remarried after losing a spouse, feeling overwhelming joy on their wedding day, yet also deep grief. Parents who've had a rainbow baby, celebrating new life while carrying the pain of a previous loss.
And that's what we wanted to explore with Bex. She's navigated bereavement, divorce, fertility struggles, and the loss of time itself.
And when she found herself happily remarried and then unexpectedly pregnant, she was surprised to find that joy wasn't her only feeling.
It was hard to celebrate because I did have this fear that we were going to miscarry. And then when you do start telling people, we're so overjoyed for us. And we were as well, we really, really were. But I think I was too scared to celebrate initially. That was really difficult and I felt so guilty about that.
Bex opens up about the unexpected emotions that came with suddenly being pregnant after believing it might never happen. The joy, the fear of finally having what she longed for, and how as a counsellor she navigated her grief and processed these complex feelings.
Any dream that you have in life that you desperately want, we've got to be so careful that we don't hang our level of happiness or our level of contentment on whether or not we achieve that dream. We can't fix pain, trauma, hurt, loss by achieving the next dream or the next goal. We've got to work through it.
Once again, we explored the complex nature of grief, the unusual places we can feel loss, and the confusion of feeling loss and gratitude at the same time.
This is a deeply personal and sometimes difficult conversation to have, and we feel privileged to explore it with Bex. But before we begin, we want to emphasise something that we and Bex feel strongly about. Acknowledging the emotions of loss in a joyful life transition doesn't diminish the happiness or gratitude felt in those moments. Both can coexist, and that's okay.
Loss can be such a fantastic opportunity to reflect on what you value and what you want to embrace in your life moving forwards. I think love and joy go hand in hand with loss, because if we allow ourselves to be vulnerable and take risks to experience true, deep love, joy and intimacy, you run the risk of loss. The best things that have come out of my life have been as a result of loss.
So let's get going. We start off this conversation by asking Bex to tell us a bit about herself.
So I'm Bex. I live near Reading with my husband and little dog, Sammy. A typical week for me is I'm a counsellor. I specialise in drug and alcohol addiction, but I work with all sorts of different areas. But life is about to change very much because I'm going to be having a baby in a few weeks.
Yay!
Whoop, whoop. And so at the time of recording, this week is your last week at work. So lots of emotions of signing off, and we're adding to the emotions now with this conversation. So really great to have your time. So thank you for having this chat with us.
It's an interesting area that we're going to talk to you about because we want to look at loss, but the loss that comes through good transitions, like having a baby or getting married, these stages that we have in life that can be really happy, but also a little bit sad or confusing or other stuff going on. So before we sort of look at the kind of the tension of holding good and bad things together, tell us a little bit about your experience of loss. What kind of experience have you had of loss or grief in your life so far?
So I I've had some personal losses, and I also experience loss a lot in my professional work, kind of through counselling clients and that side of things as well. But personally, probably the most difficult losses I've ever experienced was married before. And unfortunately, that marriage ended in a separation and a divorce. And we also had fertility issues in that marriage, which we knew about before we were married. I had a medical history that indicated that it was going to be really difficult for me. In fact, I was told I probably would never conceive naturally. So went through quite a long journey of infertility, trying lots of different treatment options. And we came to a place where we had just started the IVF journey when, at that time, was when the marriage fell apart. So there was a lot of losses involved in that, you know, a loss of marriage, as well as the loss of dreams of children, loss of my home, loss of money. So I sort of literally, my life, everything stopped and I kind of started again. And actually, one of the most difficult losses, I would say, during all of that, or for me to process, was what I would kind of call a feeling like lost time. So that whole journey of meeting my first husband and getting married and trying to have children and it not happening was, I think, about 12 years. And so then you kind of find yourself in this position and you think, oh my gosh, have I just wasted 12 years? You know, that's how it feels at the time. So I kind of felt like I'd lost life really. And I was still very, very young. So yeah, that's the kind of some of the personal losses. And also at the same time of that, we lost my grandma, my mum's mum, and that was a really difficult passing, especially from my mum. So there was kind of loss going on in the family as well at the same time.
It's interesting that you mentioned those losses because that's exactly the sort of thing we want to explore on the podcast, not just bereavements, but other things like divorce and not having children and loss of time that people go through. But not everyone recognises them as losses. So not everybody allows them maybe the time they need to be grieved. Do you think that you recognised them as loss? Did you grieve them? Did you grieve well if you did?
I think some of them you are so acutely aware that it's a loss. Some of it not so much. One of the really strange things about infertility or desiring children and it not happening is you don't actually know what you're grieving. You're grieving the loss of a dream. And it's a dream that you imagine, that you look at people around you and what they're experiencing, but you don't actually know what you're missing out on. So I knew that was a loss, but to see it as a loss that kind of requires grieving in the same way, it took me a while to see that.
All the while going through this, you're going into work and doing a job where you're trying to help people that are struggling, that are themselves, having lost elements of themselves, their coping mechanisms, whatever it may be. You did say that was quite tough. What are some of the areas at work as well that could have been the most sort of draining or require the most from you because they're very needy situations?
It was hard, but I feel actually quite blessed to have been working where I was at the time. I was working in a rehab for men, residential rehab for men, overcoming drug and alcohol addiction. Very demanding environment, very difficult work. But the staff and the residents, we did talk about very much being a family and a community. So it was supportive in terms of people. I made the decision to tell people what was going on because I thought actually people can see she's obviously going through something. So, and I really believe actually that it's very important if you're talking to people about honesty and authenticity and genuineness, like you've got to model it. So I told people what was going on. And actually, initially I was okay because quite often, with loss and grief, you have that shock, that numbness at the beginning. And so I spoke to my manager at the time and I said, I'm actually doing okay, but I know there'll come a time where it will hit me. And when that's approaching, can we have another discussion? And so I did. I took a little bit of a step back, took some time out because I knew I needed to at that point, because when you're kind of going through the ringer yourself, you haven't really got what you need to give to other people. So it was difficult, but actually I could have been in a work setting where people don't talk about mental health. They don't understand mental health. And that, I think that would have been a whole lot harder.
Can I ask how you knew when the time came to take that step back? What were sort of the symptoms physically, emotionally? How did you feel to get to that point that, okay, yeah, now I'm not doing okay? What changed?
That's a really good question. So, as a counsellor, the most important thing in counselling is that you are wholly present with your client. And sometimes clients talk about things and it brings stuff up for you, and that's not a problem. You're trained as a counsellor to be able to quickly recognise that, park it, and basically think either that's not relevant here and it disappears out your mind, or, oh, I might need to come back to that later. And I knew that if I started to feel that I wasn't able to be wholly present, that would be a massive warning sign. I didn't get to that point, but I could see that because I was getting to a place of feeling very exhausted, quite mentally and emotionally worn down over a period of time, I started to sort of see little hints of that. And I thought, I'm going to stop now, because I've seen counsellors leave it too long, where you keep trying and then you're in burnout, and then the recovery is so much worse. So I spoke to my clinical supervisor and I said to her, I think give it much longer, I will stop being able to be wholly present for my clients, and now is probably the time to stop. And actually, when I did, when you allow yourself to stop, that's really probably when most of the symptoms, so to speak, hit me. I took a few weeks off work, and I remember literally an achievement was just sort of waking up and getting through the day, because your body just suddenly shuts down, doesn't it? It just stops because you've let it stop, and you're just exhausted by that point.
So if we look at the good transitions that you've had that have brought about more loss, it's a really interesting subject, and some people are going to understand this straight away, because I've had podcast guests already that have spoke about it, and some people are not going to understand this at all until they really hear you speaking about what it's like. So because you've been through all that and you're able to recognise the signs, you know what loss looks like, is that why you recognised it in the good transitions that were happening? Or was it something completely different that alerted you to the fact that actually this is a really happy thing I'm going through, but I've got lost there as well? And maybe just tell us what those transitions actually were.
I think being a counsellor helped, because by the time I was going through these happier transitions, prior to that, I had developed good self-awareness, which you need to have. So I am very quick at spotting what I think and feel and being able to reflect on that. But some of it did completely catch me off guard. And that's because I am human. Counsellors aren't like these like beings that seem to just be able to process everything perfectly. So there were certain things that I kind of thought, right, I need to prepare for. When I found myself single and thinking, I don't know if I will get another chance to be in a relationship, marry. I very much thought I will never get the chance to have children. I knew that if those opportunities came up, I kind of thought it might freak me out a little bit, because I might be like, oh, wait, is this all going to go wrong again? Can I trust that this is going to last? Can I trust that this is right? It's a good decision. So, yeah, some of it I kind of thought I need to prepare for that. But then other parts, so like when my now husband and I fell pregnant earlier this year, and the journey we've sort of been on in that pregnancy, I wasn't expecting to find it as difficult as I did. The kind of this joyful, amazing, literally what feels like a miracle. I probably wasn't fully prepared for how difficult I was going to find that.
Explain a bit about why it's difficult. What is it that makes it hard? Where is there loss involved?
So some of this might sound really naive, but I had never thought about what being pregnant would feel like. I think that was probably self-protection during all of the fertility treatment, where you keep going to the hospital for these scans, and you're looking at an empty womb and you're thinking, oh, well, yeah, okay, that's another failed attempt. So I guess to protect myself, had never sort of thought what it would feel like. And also I had thought, well, if I ever do get to have a baby and children, obviously life completely changes. I've seen all of my friends go through it. You know, that goes without saying, doesn't it? You bring a life into the world and your life completely changes. What I hadn't thought about is that actually your life completely changes the minute you get that positive test. And the other thing with that as well, I think because I'd been on I'm quite happy to say my age, I'm now 38. I'd been on my own for a while. I had got life established, my routine established. One of the things that I went through the divorce when I was coming out of the other side was, I was like, I have got an amazing opportunity here for the next chapter, to write my life how I want it to be, you know, to do the things that I want to do, set all these goals, these dreams, and I can just go out and do it. I don't have any commitments. So when I became pregnant, and physically, mentally and emotionally, everything in my body was changing all at once, my lifestyle was completely interrupted. I'm a incredibly active, adventurous person. I like going out doing lots of different things, and I couldn't do any of it. And within that, I lost my social network. During the week, I'd be doing lots of things with friends that I'd made through the gym, actually, kind of social things. So I was missing out socially. I was missing out physically. The exercise and activity that I used to do was great for my mental health. I hadn't realized how dependent I was on that for my mental health. So I lost kind of that. And also at the same time, just before I found out I was pregnant, I had resigned from a part-time job that I had, which was a very difficult decision for me to make, to lose that job. So my kind of weekly routine literally disappeared overnight. And that might not sound like a big deal, you know, so what? Okay, you can't go for as much runs, or you can't, you know, you were going to leave that job anyway. But when there's lots of losses and lots of different layers in that loss going on at once, suddenly I was like, I'm not going out, I'm not seeing people. And then on top of that, you add in all of the lovely nausea that you get and the wonderful hormones. Because of my medical history with the infertility, like my hormone, I have always had issues with hormones. It just went mental in the pregnancy. And I just didn't know how to kind of handle all of that at once, basically. And I sort of was thinking, you know, when you have a baby, you expect all of that. You expect everything. You expect to not work. You expect to not socialize. You expect to not go out on your paddleboard or your canoe or go and climb a mountain, which is what you used to do. You expect that, and I haven't expected it. So maybe that sounds naive, but it caught me off guard.
And then with that in mind, what was your experience of, I guess, to use the word miracle, like you said, after having a period of time with just lots of trauma and lots going wrong, suddenly here you are with this miraculous turnaround. And I'm guessing, assuming that there was a level of expectation around you of, you know, 100% celebration, jubilation, sort of cheer up, this is wonderful news. Did you feel pressure to, you know, have to put on this is, under the surface I might be feeling one way, but of course I'm delighted? Or did you feel any paranoia that people might think you're just being negative, or you just need to be celebrating this more? What was that experience like?
It was so odd. So my husband and I had been on a holiday. We'd been to Lanzarote, not knowing that I would have been a few weeks pregnant. And when we got back, I basically, it sounds so bizarre, but I had this dream that I was pregnant. And I just thought, oh, I've had dreams like that before, but this felt very, very different. I woke up and I strongly believed something in my body has changed. And my husband was about to be going to San Francisco on a work trip for a week. And I said to him, I didn't tell him about the dream because I thought he's going to think I'm absolutely nuts. But I said to him, I think I'd like to do a pregnancy test before you go away, because this is going to sound ridiculous, but something feels different. So he's packing his suitcase. I'm taking him to Heathrow in an hour's time. I'm in the bathroom doing a pregnancy test, comes up positive, and I can't say a word. I literally was like shocked. And I called him in and I just showed it to him. And I could feel excitement initially bubbling up, but this massive fear of admitting it, because I just thought, well, it wasn't meant to be this easy. I thought we were going to be going through IVF. I couldn't say a word. Fortunately, he was like, would you like me to go down the shop and get a second test? So I was like, yeah, please, please. So he goes and does that, comes back, that's positive. And then we're literally like, right, well, you better finish packing your bag. I go drop him off at Heathrow. We have a cuddle and a kiss goodbye, both being like, don't really want you to go, but have a nice trip. And then he's gone. And then I'm sat at home, like, I don't know what to do with this. So,
staring at two pregnancy tests.
yeah. So we'd agreed that we would both tell a person each for support. I contacted my sister and I just said to her, I just need somebody else to know. But it was hard to celebrate because we agreed that first trimester we were not going to tell people like a lot of couples do, because I did have this fear that we were going to miscarry. I thought, well, I've always had health problems. So it was like this constantly trying to keep a lid on the excitement. And then when you do start telling people, especially people that knew us well, knew my history, were so overjoyed for us. And we were as well. We really, really were. But I think this fear of, this is a dream that I've had for such a long time, I never thought would materialize. I was too scared to celebrate initially. And that was, that was really difficult. And I felt so guilty about that. I felt so guilty at the time because I know what it's like to be in the infertility boat. And I know when I was in that position, it can be really hard when people fall pregnant. And I felt really guilty. I thought I should be dancing on the ceiling about this. But actually, that was something that I worked through and, kind of got into a much better place with. So yeah, it's even now at 35 weeks, it's kind of like, oh my gosh, how did we get here? It's crazy.
There is such a mix in the world, especially when you've been in the infertility boat, like you said, of joy and grief at these moments. But usually it's for other people. So, either you're the one that's not pregnant and someone is, so it makes you a bit sad, or you're the one that is pregnant and you've got to tell someone who can't get pregnant or hasn't been pregnant that you are. And that can be very difficult for friendships if you're close because you don't have children. So I'm guessing that's quite difficult. But I remember we went on to a conference that was for people going through infertility. And one of the speakers there said a statement that didn't make much sense to me at the time, but I can see it more now, having experienced it through other people more, that a baby wasn't the cure to the grief of infertility. And at the time you think, well, that seems crazy. That's all that anybody here is after, really. But I've seen it so many times that people find there is that grief. And when you get the baby, because life can get so difficult physically and, everything changes, it doesn't take away, it doesn't solve that grief instantly, that you couldn't have them. So there's always a lot of emotions and turmoil. Did you find that difficult? And did you have friends that you had to tell that you knew it was going to be difficult for them to hear the news?
Yeah, I did. I had one friend in particular who, I had a few friends that have either childless and have decided to not continue down that journey, or a few friends that are childless and are still looking into options. But I had one friend in particular who, her and her husband, tragically a few years ago, experienced a unexpected stillbirth at full term. And I was particularly concerned about having that conversation with her. I got myself a little bit tied up in knots over it. And then I just suddenly thought, well, you've had that experience of infertility. How did you want people to talk to you? And actually, the bottom line is you just want people to sensitively take you to one side and tell you. So I did tell her separately, and she was genuinely very, very thrilled, because she was like, I know the journey that you've been on. And that conversation actually was fine. I needn't have kind of worried about it as much as I did. But yeah, I do agree with you that, not just with having a baby, but any dream that you have in life that you desperately want, we've got to be so careful that we don't hang our level of happiness or our level of contentment on whether or not we achieve that dream. Because you can get there, and actually, if you've got other unresolved hurt, pain, grief, loss, like, you don't suddenly feel a million times better. It doesn't just solve things. And I don't think it's particularly a coincidence that my journey of falling pregnant when I did actually came at a time in my life after a few years where I was kind of like, yes, I would love a family, but I'd accepted life where it was. And I remember saying to friends, and my husband and I haven't been married very long, and I remember having conversations with him and saying to my friends, we will have a good life. I know we will have a good life. There'll be pain there if we don't get to have children. I know that. But I think because I'd managed to get away from that place of thinking, unless I have a family, my life's not going to feel complete. Unless I get to have this baby, I'm not going to feel fulfilled. I got into that place of being like, actually, we will be okay. We will be okay. So yeah, I think it's hard not to kind of hang on to a dream, isn't it? It's hard not to think, oh, if I can get that, if I can get that, if I can get that. It's so much harder to try and be content in present life. And I yeah, I don't want to kind of say this lightly or glibly, just, because people might be listening and be like, well, of course you can say that, you're pregnant now. Like, I don't mean that lightly. But yeah, we can't fix pain, trauma, hurt, loss by achieving the next dream or the next goal. We've got to work through it.
And working through it, for you to come back to sort of early in the chat, there's been multiple layers of, recognizing pain and loss, whether that be time, money, previous marriage, the whole sort of infertility IVF story, family losses as well, bereavements. Have you found sort of echoes of what you described with the pregnancy? Have you found echoes of that into other layers as well? Like things like you mentioned time. I could certainly look back on our story and just think, I'm mid-40s now, but much of my 30s I could just write off because it just felt like 10 years of I didn't know what was going on. And, I'm a very proactive, love to achieve, love to be busy. And I look back and just think that for me, it feels like such a shame that I spent that decade just not really feeling like I was enjoying living. I mean, I don't mean that. I was loving living. I enjoy life, but it's like, what a shame to have a decade where I don't really look at it like I've achieved very much. Others would say, of course you've achieved a lot. It's like, well, it doesn't feel like it. I feel like I'm in the same position age 40 as I was age 30, and 10 years has gone by. So what's it been like just experiencing, feeling that processing in the wider layers of other losses as well?
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. I think I look at my 20s in that way. And I was quite angry when I was looking at, I've wasted and lost in my 20s. The 20s are meant to be the best time of your life. And, you've come out of uni and you've got all this possibility in front of you. And I looked at that, back on that decade, as, well, that was a bit of a shambles. And that was pretty awful, actually. And I think with getting remarried, and this is going to sound a bit soppy, bit cliche, but I'm so blessed with my husband. We have a fantastic relationship and we are a partnership. We very much, we talk about being a team. Sometimes I'm like, oh, this sounds a little bit kind of corny, maybe a little bit American-esque, like, how can we be more of a team and all this sort of thing. But we talk about being a partnership. And so sometimes, once we'd gone through the dating and we knew our relationship was serious, and then we got engaged, we got married, that as well kind of stirred up a bit of anger and frustration and hurt at my 20s, because I was like, I could have had this then. What was I doing? And why didn't I have this before? And the why questions that sometimes can come up when you're processing loss. A lot of those were coming up for me. And, again, now, like, I know 38 I'm not the oldest woman to have a baby, but there was a time where doctors were telling me that once you're 35 and over, you're a geriatric mother. And so, I was hearing these things of like, am I going to be stood at the school gates looking like...
Well, sat at the school gates.
Yes,
Yeah, too old to stand. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. Oh, I can't stand up while I wait for the kids. So I think grieving time, I've come to realise that if you are in a place where you feel that you are grieving time, I actually think that's one of the hardest losses to move through, because you can't get that back, whether it's your 20s, your 30s, 40s, 50s, whatever it is. But, it is about trying to get to a place where I don't look back at my 20s now and think that was a waste of life or a wasted decade. I don't feel like that now, but I'm aware that actually it took me quite a lot of processing to get to that place.
Yeah, you mentioned the why questions there, and we ask most of our guests, how has that question kind of come into your experience? Has it been something that's haunted you? Has it been something you've never asked? Have you had to answer it? Have you had to let it go unanswered? So what were the why questions that were coming up for you, and how have you got to that point of accepting that that wasn't your 20s, they weren't what you wanted them to be? Do you think you have come to a place now where you can accept that, and how did you get there?
I think I have accepted it. I do have moments where, occasionally it gets a bit triggered, which I think is really normal. I don't think when you process a major loss, sometimes I think we can talk about dealing with it and having healed from it. And I don't think that means this never affects me ever again. I think that's actually a really unhealthy and unrealistic belief that we can have. I think what happens is you get to a place where it doesn't dominate things as much and you find a new way of living. And sometimes things happen that maybe re-trigger it. So it does crop up sometimes, but it doesn't hold the pain or the weight that it used to. I mean, I had at times some of the why questions that came into my mind. I remember really berating myself because I remember thinking this is disgraceful and disgusting that I'm thinking these things. But, let's be honest, loss can take you to really dark places. And when I was trying for a baby and it wasn't happening, so I've worked in drug and alcohol services my whole working career. I've worked in prisons, I've worked in community drug services as well as rehab. And I've seen a lot of the dark side of life. I've seen a lot of horrendously traumatic things, and I've seen a lot of children be taken away from their parents. And I've worked with a lot of adults who were taken away as children from their parents. And some of the why questions that were coming up for me at that time, they felt horrible. I was thinking, why on this planet has this person been able to have a baby that they have abused in awful ways to the point where that child's been taken away from them? And yet here I am feeling like I've got a lot of love to give and it's not happening. And some of the why questions at that time were horrible. They felt horrible and quite judgmental and critical. And, you might be out and about and see somebody call their child something horrendous. And you think, at the time you'd be like, you shouldn't be allowed to have that child, why, and all this sort of thing. So there was that side of things. But I also think for me, something that really helped was I've always had beliefs in that each of us have got meaning and purpose, but there's meaning and purpose greater than ourselves. And when I was going through the divorce, it was so painful. But I remember thinking, I'm shocked that this has happened. I never thought that this would happen to me, and not in a million years. But I didn't ask why so much, because I thought, well, this is probably, when I get through this and I come out the other side, this is probably going to make me a better person. It's probably going to strengthen my character, and it's probably going to make me a better counsellor. And so I almost had a why and a sense of purpose from thinking, well, I actually believe that this is going to create something really good for me. So sometimes I had the why questions, and other times I was like, I don't need to ask why, because I believe that something better is going to come out of this.
Yeah, really interesting to hear that. You seem to have a really unique ability to, maybe that's the counsellor in you, to be able to sort of analyse and assess. I think with that role, with that job, because there's two things that it makes me think of. One is perspective and one is comparison. So often there's this recurring theme when we speak to people through the podcast of once we got over that feeling that, you're not alone, that you're not the only one going through this, it helped. So I'm guessing, having done the job and worked in the areas and the places that you have, whether that be prisons or in recovery, you must have seen so much that's given you quite a healthy perspective. But sometimes comparison can be unhealthy. If you're comparing your story with somebody else's, sometimes that can be unhealthy. So yeah, how has it helped or hindered at times to have that perspective of working with people that are quite broken in order to help you work out your own circumstance?
It's helped in that I've worked with a lot of people who have had very, very traumatic lives, both in prison and in the rehab. I've worked with people that have served life sentences that, maybe have done what society would say are unforgivable things. And also maybe they've had unforgivable things done to them as well. I can't count the number of people I've seen in that situation who have genuinely turned their lives around. And that helped me and massively encouraged me, because I tread carefully, because you've talked about comparison, and I it's not that I sit there and I compare myself to them like overtly, but you do say things to yourself like, they have had awful things done to them, or they've done awful things, and they've managed to come out the other side. And that has encouraged me to make me think, well, the divorce and the infertility, and then how scared I was to trust that the remarriage and this pregnancy and everything was going to be okay, was really hard. But wait, if this person that's just come out of prison for 20 years has managed to turn their life around, then I think I can as well. So that was encouraging. And but at the same time, I mean, you mentioned about the kind of the counselling side of things. Yeah, I've got a great ability to be able to reflect, process, look at different perspectives and that sort of thing. Sometimes it's flipping annoying that, and you sort of wish, I'd quite like to have a break from being able to do that. And sometimes I look at people and I think, sometimes ignorance can be bliss, and maybe it would be better to not be able to not to have to kind of go through all this rigmarole of processing and reflecting and understanding. And I'm not a quick processor. I never have been. I've always been somebody that I need time to reflect, and I need to talk out loud to people. I'm an external processor. So yeah, my support network were absolutely incredible. The comparison side of things is really difficult. And actually, the one thing that was very unhelpful, which comes up occasionally, is when you say, I should be able to deal with this because I'm a counsellor. I mean, that is so, all the people I know that are counsellors, we talk about this and say how damaging that can be. Because like I said to you earlier, yeah, you're a counsellor, but you're a human. You're human, and you're allowed to not know how to process something.
When you're going through the good transition, so you've remarried, you've got a baby on the way, but you're still feeling these pain points and this loss in with it, is that quite a lonely experience? Because I'm guessing it's not something that's easy to voice to everybody, because not everyone would understand.
It definitely can feel lonely. And I'm often aware of, I'm not going to talk to clients about this sort of thing, for example. And it's not a coincidence that, when we talked about recording this, I wanted to record it when I was wrapping up my work. So I've got a private counselling practice that I'm finishing with all of my clients this week. And then I'll be taking a year off for maternity. Because obviously, this is going out in the public sphere, and I've got to think about the fact that one of those clients may stumble across this on the internet and hear it. So certainly talking about things in a public forum, you have to think really carefully about, as a counsellor, what you put out there. But with kind of my friends and family, I mean, I've got such good and close friendships. I haven't felt lonely in terms of, if I've wanted to have a space to talk about it, I can. And the person that I can talk to easiestly and most freely about anything is my husband. And he's brilliant. He deserves a medal, to be honest, because he knows that I am a slow external processor. And actually, he knows that if he just gives me a bit of space to offload, to cry, to talk, to express, he doesn't actually have to do anything other than listen. He doesn't have to try and fix anything because he knows that that's not what I'm asking for or what I need. So yeah, it sometimes it can feel lonely, and it tends to feel lonely if you fall into that trap of that awful thing I said about, well, I'm a counsellor and I should be able to know how to do this. That's when it can feel lonely. But I try and challenge that and just be like, no, I need to rant and offload and express just like anybody else, and just be kind of proactive at making sure that I do that.
What would you say to people who are listening and who have gone through something similar, something good's happened to them, but it has also brought a lot of pain or loss with it, and they haven't got people around who would understand that? There's that expectation, well, this has happened for you now, this is good, so you should just be looking forward and be happy. Is there anything that you can say to help them process that? Is there a way that they can maybe allow themselves to feel it?
To me, the most important thing ever is, if you're connecting with somebody that's in that space, is to validate and normalize that, be with them. And, you just said there that, some of the things that people say is, oh, but this is what you wanted. This is amazing, and I loved the episode on your podcast with Jodie Day when she talks about disenfranchised grief, which is when you might share or you might say something about a loss that you're experiencing, and it's met with basically a response that says, that denies it, minimizes it, says you shouldn't have that. And so actually, if we can say to people, do you know what, it's really normal to be so excited and joyful about something, but also feeling a real sense of loss and terror and fear at the same time. I met this lady. I was out walking the dog recently. She just started chatting to me. I'd never met her before. And she was a bit tearful. And she said, oh, you have to forgive me. I can't stop crying. My last child's just gone off to uni. And I'm not coping. And we ended up walking around the field together and having a lovely chat. And I was trying to say to her that, because she was like, I should be happy. Like, all my kids have gone off. They've made these great choices. And I was like, yeah, but you've been a mum for 27 years when you span the ages of the children, and it's the empty nest syndrome, and that's normal. People that are counting down days till they retire, and then they get into their retirement and they feel redundant. They feel, what's my purpose? What am I achieving? The more that we can fight against sort of disenfranchised grief and talk to people and say that is normal, that you're feeling a loss amongst the joy, and try and help them normalize that, is, I just think, is one of the most important things we can do, to just be with people where they are.
I want to repackage all that you just said in a very short, succinct way. Okay, this is going to be fun. What would be the nicest, most appropriate, sensitive, lovely, warm comment that someone could write in your congratulations, baby's here card, that I guess summarizes that in a few lines?
Oh my goodness.
That's the sort of thing I'd spend like half an hour over with the pen and the paper. I really want to get this right.
We haven't got half an hour. You've got 10 seconds.
Do you remember when I said that I'm a real slow processor?
Yes.
We'll edit out the 10 minutes of silence.
I think just something that captures that essence of, whatever the journey holds lying ahead, delighted to walk alongside with you in it.
Yeah.
Something around that, because I was actually quite surprised when we started announcing the pregnancy. The vast majority of the people said congratulations, followed by a tirade of negative things. But that sounded more dramatic than I meant it to be. But things like, oh, congratulations, that's it, life's over, you're never going to sleep again, or good luck doing XYZ. And you laugh it off, because we all know that, well, I'll know for sure in a short while that having a newborn baby is probably, you go insane with the lack of sleep at times. But actually, after a while, like when so many people are saying that to you, you start to go, oh my goodness, like, is this a good idea? So I know that that's kind of added a little bit of waffle onto the concise answer there, Chris, but like...
No, that's good to know. I'm just using some correction fluid on the card to take out the line that I was writing saying, yeah, life's over for you. No more sleep. I'm scrubbing that out now.
Yeah, don't know about that. But I think it's just like, none of us know what life is going to be like when we go into a new chapter, when you're going through a transition. I have come to learn in life that I think love and joy go hand in hand with loss. I think the two walk side by side, because if we allow ourselves to be vulnerable and take risks to experience true, deep love, joy, and intimacy, you run the risk of loss. And those things just go hand in hand. So when we're celebrating new transitions in life and new chapters, whatever that is, getting married, retiring, coming out of prison, having a baby, to just know that people say congratulations and we're here for this journey, whatever that entails. For me, I've learned that to be something that is, yeah, just really important and gold dust.
Yeah, amazing. And love, joy, it makes me think of hope as well. That part of this mission of this podcast is we're exploring 101 different types of loss to see, where can hope exist? Can hope exist in every type of loss? Have there been any sort of times throughout those different layers that we've spoken about of grief and loss where you felt completely devoid of hope? And how are you doing now in a sense of rediscovering hope for the future, hope for the next steps, whatever they may contain?
I did have some moments where I would say I felt very, very hopeless. I don't think it ever disappeared completely. It might have gone down to like 1%. I remember a time where, I got a dog and I was going through the divorce. Best decision I ever made. He's absolutely nuts, but he was the best thing for me. And I remember having a day, I'm laughing because you can laugh when you look back, but thinking I could fall down the stairs, break my neck and die and not be found for a few days, and someone comes in and there's the dog licking my dead body. That sort of like that sort of image of, oh my gosh, life is hopeless. Like no one's going to even know if I'm dead. I had some dark moments, but I don't think I ever lost hope completely, partly because I had people around me that believed in me, but predominantly because I've got a faith, I've got a Christian faith. And even though I would have dark days, feel very low, sometimes ask those why questions, I believed in God, and I believed that that it wasn't going to last like that forever, and it was going to be okay. And I read something at the time, I think by a man called Paul Miller, and he talks about that in life, it's really important to be aware of reality, but fixed on hope. And I explored that a lot at the time. And I thought, what does that mean for me? The reality was life is not great right now. I can't find anywhere to live. I was working for a charity. I was on a very low income. And with the dog, a lot of landlords don't accept pets. I couldn't find anywhere to live. I couldn't afford rent by myself. As we talked about, thought, well, my 20s, what a load of poo that was. My reality was I was suffering and I was in pain. But I thought, right, well, what's being fixed on hope? And actually being fixed on hope for me meant leaning quite heavily on that faith and just knowing and trusting that I didn't know what the path ahead was. I had no idea how I was going to get out of it and I was going to move on. But I knew, I believed it was going to be better. Something was going to be better. And that hope was what I kind of hung on to.
I'm really grateful that got somebody on the podcast speaking about this, because I hope that it will sort of help people to remember that just because something happy is happening to somebody, it doesn't mean that it's all great. And I think for myself, because of doing the podcast and lots of things like that, I'm very aware of that. For example, if someone has lost a partner, if they've died or something and they're getting remarried, that's going to bring up grief, during the wedding. That's a complicated process. Same with divorce. Same with somebody having secondary infertility. They might have a baby already, but not be able to have any more. That's a very real grief for some people. And I think these things they're things that people aren't very comfortable talking about quite often, but they are things we can spot. And for those of us who want to get things right, who want to write in the card the right message, who want to kind of temper our, I hear from people who have become pregnant from the infertility world. Friends will message us and they'll do it in a kind way because they know where we are with our situation. And that can be really hard for them. But equally, usually it's quite early days for them, or it might not be. But I'm not overly excited about it with them, partly because I know that things can still go wrong, and it's a very fragile journey, especially with those first babies. And I'll temper that a little bit, and I hope that if then they need to speak to somebody, they find it easier to come to someone like me, because I wasn't the one that was going mad with, oh, it's amazing, it's the best thing ever. And that can be hard to approach people who are really, really happy for you sometimes. So I hope this is something that's really opened up some thought processes for people around the loss and the grief that can be tied into these really good things. Because I do think a lot of people see the good things and think, well, there you are, get on with it. You've got everything you want. And to a degree, there is a level of, needing to be grateful for what we have. But that doesn't mean it doesn't come with pain and loss. And I think we do need to feel that, because a lot of people will feel guilty about allowing that into those good moments. But I think if you don't, it will come out somewhere else further down the line. So
Yeah, definitely. Because I felt so guilty when, like I said, I was stepping out of that infertility boat. I thought, because I know what it's like, and I know you've both spoken about this on your episode, about you bond with people when you're childless and you bond with them, and then when they get pregnant and they have children, you're not going to hang out with them. Like, life's going to change. So, you do feel guilty, or you can feel guilty about that. But also, I think, yes, we want to be sensitive and careful about how we talk to people, how we tell them things, but we also, we can't spend our lives constantly treading on eggshells thinking, oh, am I going to say the wrong thing? And sometimes I say the wrong things to people, and we do it. But if we can bring it back to that basic of whatever somebody is going through, wherever they're at, you can't go wrong if you just say to them, oh, just tell me what that's like for you. You can never go wrong with that.
Yeah, no, it's great advice. It's always nice to have a few comments or words like that in your back pocket, especially if you do find those conversations tricky. And we all do. I do a podcast on this. I remember sitting next to somebody a while ago who'd lost their husband. My mind was completely blank. So it is hard. It's difficult. But it's nice to have those sorts of things. And that's kind of my go. How are you getting on? How are you doing? Tell me about it. You can't go wrong. And if they don't want to, then that's fine. It's not personal. They're just not in that place.
Right, final question time. So, Bex, wonderful to be able to hear about some of your experience. Thank you for sharing what you have. Really appreciated that. To finish up with in this conversation, tell us, what's your Herman?
Yes. So I may have cheated a little bit in that it's a two-parter. If you can have a two-parter, Herman. But the first thing for me is, I think, when you find yourself in the acute stage of loss, when it's really painful and you're in that heavy grief, my Herman at that stage would be absolutely to give yourself permission to be where you're at. Allow yourself to feel what you feel and be where you are, and give yourself the permission that you would to other people around you. If you were talking to somebody else, you wouldn't say to them, oh, grow up, don't be so ridiculous. Just let yourself be where you are. And if you're in an exciting phase of life, it's okay that you can have loss at the same time. But the second part would be, when you're in that place of adjusting, loss can be such a fantastic opportunity to reflect on what you value and what you want to embrace in your life moving forwards. The best things that have come out of my life have been as a result of loss. So when you're adapting, you don't want to minimize it, you don't want to deny it. But actually, you can see this as an opportunity to grasp hold of what really matters to you in life, and how do you want those values to shape your new way of being.
How often have we heard people say that some of the best things in life have come out of loss? That doesn't mean it's everyone's experience, but if you're open to it, loss can sometimes make way for unexpected beauty, bringing things into your life that you might never have had otherwise. And we're pleased to tell you that since we recorded the episode, Bex and her husband have had a lovely baby girl. It wasn't the easiest start to motherhood, because Bex had a complicated birth and was then unwell and readmitted to hospital. So she's now having to work through some disappointment at not being able to be there for her daughter in the way she wanted to straight away. But she's very thankful for the help and support she's got around her as she processes this.
Life is hard. Do you know what? It's complicated being human. So it's great to explore all these different facets of grief in such an honest way. So thank you, Bex, for all you shared. If you want to find out more about her, you can visit her website, pineforesttherapies.com. But please note that the Contact Me feature's been turned off while she's on maternity leave.
And for more about us, you can pop over to thesilentwhy.com for all you need to know there. Or you can find us at The Silent Why Pod on most social medias.
And we want to introduce you to Herman. Maybe you know someone that's going through something happy, but also deep down you know they're struggling with some loss there too. It can be hard to know how to express your support at a time like that. So why not send them a Herman?
Because Hermans aren't just a question that we ask every guest. They're also a heartfelt grief companion that you can send to someone going through a difficult time. Each one is handmade by me, carefully packaged in a beautiful box, and comes with a flyer explaining who Herman is and why he's being sent. By gifting a Herman, you're not only offering your loved one a unique and meaningful gesture of support, but you're also helping to sustain the podcast, allowing us to continue sharing conversations about grief and loss. So to send one now, visit thehermancompany.com, and don't worry, all the links are in the show notes so you don't have to memorise them.
Well, we've reached the end of this episode and we'll finish with a quote, this time from psychotherapist and writer Francis Weller.
The work of the mature person is to carry grief in one hand and gratitude in the other, and to be stretched large by them. How much sorrow can I hold? That's how much gratitude I can give. If I carry only grief, I'll bend towards cynicism and despair. If I have only gratitude, I'll become saccharine, and I won't develop much compassion for other people's suffering. Grief keeps the heart fluid and soft, which helps make compassion possible.